The sun had just begun to set when Daniel Carter's rental car rolled off Highway 95 and onto a forgotten stretch of asphalt that wound through the Nevada desert. His GPS flickered uncertainly, recalculating every few seconds as if even the satellites weren't quite sure this road still existed. Dust clung to the windshield, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Ahead, against the endless desert horizon, a structure rose like an apparition, an ornate hotel, grand and gleaming, utterly out of place in the barren wilderness. The sign read, "The Gilded Oasis now open." Its gilded letters reflected the dying sunlight, shining far brighter than the decaying wood around it had any right to. Daniel squinted. He'd never heard of the place. The listing hadn't appeared on any mainstream travel site. He'd only found it buried deep within an obscure forum that traded tips on hidden luxury stays. He had chuckled at the phrase back then, thinking it was just another gimmick. Now, seeing the towering hotel in front of him, he wasn't so sure. The Gilded Oasis stood like a relic of the early 20th century. Tall arched windows, balconies with wrought iron railings, and grand marble steps that seemed to glow in the desert twilight. Yet something about it unsettled him. Maybe it was the way no other cars were parked out front, despite the hotel supposedly being reopened to guests. Or maybe it was how the palm trees flanking the entrance swayed, though the desert air was still. Daniel was a travel journalist for an online magazine, always hunting for stories that balanced adventure with strangeness. A hidden hotel in the middle of nowhere was too good to pass up. He parked, grabbed his camera, and ascended the marble steps. The heavy oak doors opened before he could even touch them. Inside, the lobby stretched wide and opulent. A massive chandelier of crystal and gold hung overhead, casting fractured light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Red velvet drapes cascaded from the ceiling, and a roaring fireplace gave the entire room a surreal warmth. The scent of lavender and something faintly metallic hung in the air. Daniel couldn't help but marvel. The place looked brand new, untouched by the decades of dust and decay that should have consumed it. "Welcome to the Gilded Oasis." The voice came from behind the front desk. A woman stood there, her black hair pulled into a neat bun, her uniform crisp and spotless. Her smile was perfect, too perfect, Daniel thought, like something rehearsed 1,000 times. "You must be Mr. Carter," she said smoothly. Daniel froze. "How do you?" She slid a brass key across the desk before he could finish. "Room 313. You'll find everything to your liking." Daniel picked up the key, its weight surprisingly heavy in his palm. "I didn't give you my name," he said, narrowing his eyes. Her smile widened just a fraction. "We've been expecting you." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to press further, but the warmth of the lobby seemed to press against him, suffocating. He muttered a thanks and turned toward the elevator. The ride to the third floor was silent, save for the soft hum of machinery. The elevator's mirrored walls reflected him from all angles, but as the floor numbers ticked upward, he swore he saw something else flicker in the reflection. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just behind him. He spun around, but the elevator was empty. Room 313 was at the end of a long hallway lined with identical doors, their brass numbers gleaming faintly under the glow of antique lamps. Daniel unlocked his door and stepped inside. The room was lavish, almost unnervingly so. A king-sized bed draped in silk sheets dominated the space. The wallpaper was patterned with golden vines that seemed to twist and move if he stared too long. A fruit basket sat on the table, the apples glistening as if freshly polished. He dropped his bag on the bed and pulled out his camera, snapping photos of the intricate decor. But when he reviewed the images, his stomach lurched. The photos showed the room, but it was different. The wallpaper in the photos was peeling, mold spreading across the walls. The fruit basket held nothing but rotting husks crawling with insects. And the mirror on the far wall reflected not him, but a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his face stretched in silent terror. Daniel blinked hard, lowered the camera, and looked around. The room was back to normal, lavish, perfect, untouched. His skin crawled. He was about to leave the room when a faint knock echoed from the door. He opened it cautiously, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. On the ground lay an envelope, thick parchment sealed with crimson wax. His name was written across it in ornate script. Hands trembling, he tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with 4 words scrawled in black ink. "You are already checked out." Daniel's heart pounded. A chill raced down his spine, and for the first time since arriving, he felt truly trapped. The silence of the hotel pressed in, heavy and suffocating. He glanced at the fruit basket again. This time, without the camera, he swore he saw the apple twitch. Something was very, very wrong with the gilded oasis. Daniel barely slept that first night. Every time his eyes closed, he dreamed of the mirror version of himself staring back, gaunt, lifeless, lips whispering words he couldn't hear. When he finally awoke, it was to the faint sound of a bell ringing through the halls. He stumbled to the door and peeked out. Other guests were stepping from their rooms, moving silently down the corridor as if drawn by an invisible hand. Their faces were pale, their expressions empty, but they walked with purpose. Curiosity won out over caution. Daniel followed. The group descended into the grand dining hall, a space so elaborate it looked stolen from a royal palace. Chandeliers sparkled, long tables stretched endlessly, and silver platters gleamed under golden candelabras. The air smelled of roasted meat and spiced wine, yet beneath it lingered that same faint metallic tang he had noticed the night before. The guests all sat in unison, folding their hands neatly atop the tablecloth. Daniel hesitated, then took a seat near the end. Almost immediately, waiters appeared, dozens of them, moving in eerie synchronization. Their faces were blank, their eyes glazed like mannequins. Without a word, they placed steaming dishes before each guest. Daniel glanced at his plate. A perfectly roasted duck breast, glazed with honey, garnished with rosemary sprigs. It looked mouth-watering. But when he blinked, just for an instant, he saw something else. The meat gray and stringy, veins still running through it, the plate pooling with dark blood. His stomach lurched, but when he blinked again, the dish was back to normal. Across the table, a woman in a red dress sat rigidly, her eyes wide with a silent scream. Her fork moved mechanically, lifting food to her mouth even as tears streamed down her face. Daniel leaned toward her, whispering, "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her head slowly, revealing a deep scar along her neck, stitched roughly as though someone had tried to sew her back together. Daniel recoiled, heart pounding. None of the other guests seemed to notice. Then came the voice. "Eat, Mr. Carter." He turned. At the head of the table stood a man in a pristine white suit, tall and impossibly thin, his skin almost translucent. His smile was sharp, his teeth too perfect, too many. The man raised a glass of dark red liquid and inclined his head. "You are our honored guest." Daniel's mouth went dry. He forced himself to ask, "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. The proprietor, the one who ensures the oasis thrives. His voice was velvet, soothing, but laced with something venomous beneath. This hotel is no ordinary place. It hungers, and it rewards those who feed it. Daniel glanced at his plate again. The roasted duck seemed to pulse faintly as though still alive. His gut twisted. He pushed it away. The proprietor's eyes narrowed. Refusing hospitality is unwise. The room fell silent. Every guest stopped mid-bite, their heads turning in eerie unison toward Daniel. Their mouths moved, whispering something under their breath. A chant, low and rhythmic, building in volume. "Stay, eat, stay, eat!" The lights flickered. The chandeliers swayed though there was no wind. Daniel shot up from his chair, his pulse hammering. "I need some air," he stammered, backing toward the door. The proprietor's grin never wavered. "Go on then, but remember, Mr. Carter, every guest checks out, one way or another." Daniel fled the dining hall, the chant echoing in his skull. He stumbled into the hallway, gasping, his chest tight. The walls seemed to close in, the golden wallpaper twisting into faces that leered and screamed in silence. He bolted for the staircase and climbed, desperate to reach his room. But when he arrived on the third floor, something had changed. The hallway stretched far longer than before, doors multiplying endlessly, their numbers repeating. 312, 313, 314, again and again, stretching into infinity. His key felt hot in his pocket, burning against his thigh. Panicked, he chose a door at random and shoved it open. Inside, the room was not his. It was someone else's memory. A child's bedroom, toys scattered across the floor, a mobile spinning slowly though there was no breeze. On the bed lay a figure, small, frail, covered by a sheet. Daniel stepped closer, heart in his throat. He pulled back the sheet. It was him. His own face, pale and lifeless, eyes sewn shut. Daniel stumbled back, slamming the door. His breaths came ragged, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He sprinted down the hall, the numbers blurring past him, his footsteps echoing louder than they should have. Finally, he collapsed against the wall, pressing his palms to his temples. That's when he heard it, a whisper close to his ear. "You should have eaten." Daniel turned, but the hallway was empty. Only the long, endless corridor of golden doors, each one hiding horrors he wasn't sure he wanted to see. The storm outside raged on as Ethan and Claire huddled in their dimly lit suite, the flickering lamp throwing distorted shadows against the walls. The air had grown unbearably heavy, almost suffocating, as if the hotel itself was pressing down on them. They hadn't dared to sleep. Each time one of them closed their eyes, the faintest sound of whispering drifted through the room, rising and falling like the tide. At first, it had been easy to dismiss as wind, but when the whispers began to form words, fragments of sentences that seemed to be pleading for help, they knew they weren't imagining it. Claire had insisted on keeping the bathroom door locked, convinced she'd seen movement in the mirror earlier. Ethan, meanwhile, had spent hours pacing, replaying the events of the day. The disappearing guests, the bellhop's unnerving silence, the endless, shifting hallways, and most of all, the journal he'd found. The journal of the man who had stayed at the hotel decades before, whose entries ended abruptly with an unfinished sentence. "The walls are watching. The floor is..." Ethan finally snapped the journal shut, his nerves raw. "We can't stay here, Claire. Something's wrong with this place. I don't care how hard the storm's hitting. We need to try the roads again." Claire shook her head, hugging herself tightly. "Ethan, we tried. Don't you remember? We drove for almost an hour and ended up right back here. It's like the road doesn't lead out." Her voice cracked. It's like the hotel won't let us leave." Before Ethan could argue, the lamp sputtered out, plunging the room into darkness. Claire gasped, fumbling for her phone, but when she turned it on, the screen lit up with static instead of her home screen. Lines of white and black scrolled across it, as though her phone had been hijacked by something unseen. Then words appeared in blocky letters. "Stay!" Ethan snatched the phone from her hand and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a thud, screen cracking down the middle. Silence returned, but not for long. A faint scratching began at the door, like nails dragging against the wood. Slowly, deliberately, then 3 sharp knocks. Neither of them moved. They sat frozen, every muscle locked in terror. A familiar voice broke the silence. "Housekeeping," Claire's eyes widened. It was the same bellhop's voice. Ethan grabbed her wrist, shaking his head furiously. "Don't answer," he mouthed, but the door handle turned anyway. The chain lock held as the door opened a few inches, and through the gap, they saw an eye, black, glossy, inhuman. It blinked sideways like a reptile's before the door slammed shut again. The chain rattled violently as something on the other side yanked and pulled, but after a few agonizing seconds, the struggle stopped. The whispers started again. Only this time, they were inside the room. Claire covered her ears and whimpered as voices swirled around them. Fragments of prayers, sobs, children's laughter, all warped, all wrong. Ethan stood, scanning the room for the source. That's when he noticed the carpet. The floral pattern seemed to ripple under his feet, shifting like water. He lifted one corner of the rug and recoiled. The floorboards beneath were slick with blood, fresh and glistening, pulsing as though alive. Before he could react, the entire suite trembled. The walls stretched upward, groaning, as cracks raced across the ceiling. The mirror in the bathroom shattered, spraying shards across the floor. And from the broken glass, something crawled out. A figure half-formed, its skin translucent, its face a blur of shifting features. It dragged itself into the room, leaving streaks of black liquid behind. Claire screamed. Ethan grabbed her and bolted for the door. To their shock, it swung open easily now, as if whatever had been holding it shut had let them go. They sprinted into the hallway, only to find it warped and endless. Doors lined the corridor, each identical, each glowing faintly as if lit from within. They ran, turning corner after corner, but the hallway never ended. Behind them, the distorted figure was crawling closer, its limbs bending in unnatural ways. The air grew colder, and with every step, Ethan felt as though the carpet was sucking at his shoes, trying to root him in place. Finally, they reached an elevator. The doors opened before they could press the button, and without hesitation, they leapt inside. Ethan jabbed at the lobby button, but the panel flickered and shifted. The numbers changed from 1 to 12, then to symbols he didn't recognize. The elevator lurched downward violently, sending them both to their knees. The lights inside flickered, revealing glimpses of something pressed against the glass walls' faces. Dozens of them, pale, lifeless, mouths open in silent screams. Claire clawed at Ethan, sobbing, "They're the missing people. Ethan, oh my God, they're all here." The elevator finally screeched to a halt and the doors slid open. Instead of the lobby, they found themselves in the basement. It was massive, far larger than the hotel's footprint should have allowed. The walls were lined with doors, hundreds of them, each bearing a brass plaque engraved with names. Ethan stepped closer and felt his stomach drop. One of the plaques bore his own name. Another had Claire's. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch it, but before she could, all the doors creaked open in unison. From each doorway, figures began to emerge. Guests in old-fashioned clothing, bellhops with eyeless sockets, maids with gaping mouths. Their faces were warped, their bodies stiff, moving as if controlled by invisible strings. The whispers became a roar now, echoing from every corner of the basement. "Stay, stay, stay!" Claire clung to Ethan as the figures closed in. "We're not supposed to leave," she whispered. "We were never supposed to leave." And then, from the far end of the basement, a larger door opened. The sound it made was like stone grinding against stone. A figure stepped out, taller than the rest, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The air grew icy as it approached, and the other creatures bowed their heads in reverence. The figure raised its hand, and the entire basement fell silent. Then, in a voice like 1,000 echoes layered over one another, it spoke a single word. "Welcome!" Ethan and Claire backed away, their hearts pounding. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't human. And as it stepped closer, they realized the truth. The hotel wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it had chosen them. The word "welcome" still echoed through the cavernous basement, bouncing off the stone walls like a chant that refused to die. Ethan's knees trembled as the shadowed figure approached, the brim of its hat obscuring a face that seemed to flicker with shapes that weren't human. Claire clutched his arm, nails digging into his skin, and whispered, "What is it?" Ethan couldn't answer. His throat was dry and his body screamed at him to run, but the floor beneath them had begun to shift, thick black veins spreading out like roots, curling up their legs to hold them in place. The other figures, the eyeless bellhops, the gaping maids, the guests in century-old clothes, stood perfectly still, like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. The cloaked entity raised its hand, and suddenly one of the brass-bladed doors across the basement creaked open. A young woman stumbled out, her clothes torn, her face pale and gaunt. She screamed when she saw Ethan and Claire running toward them. "Please, don't let it take me again." But before she reached them, the shadows at the entity's feet stretched out, wrapping around her ankles like snakes. She was yanked back, her screams muffled as the shadows pulled her into the figure's cloak. In an instant, she was gone, swallowed whole. Claire sobbed, pressing her forehead against Ethan's shoulder. "We're next," she whispered. The figure tilted its head, as though amused by her fear, then spoke again in that 1,000-echo voice. "You checked in. You will never check out." And with that, the shadows receded, releasing Ethan and Claire's legs. The audience of the dead parted, creating a narrow path leading toward a staircase at the far end of the basement. The entity stepped aside, gesturing with one gloved hand for them to go. Why is it letting us leave?" Ethan muttered under his breath, pulling Claire toward the stairs. She shook her head. "It's not letting us leave, it's leading us somewhere." They didn't argue. They bolted up the staircase, the whispers chasing them with every step. When they burst through the door at the top, they found themselves in the hotel's library. A cavernous room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the air thick with the smell of dust and mildew. A massive chandelier swung above them as if disturbed by a wind that didn't exist. Claire slammed the door shut, pushing a chair under the handle. "We can't keep running, Ethan. We need to understand what this place is. Why it wants us." Ethan scanned the shelves, his mind racing. The journal he'd found earlier had hinted at something ancient, something buried beneath the hotel. Maybe the answer was here. He pulled book after book, tossing them onto a table. Most were blank, their pages brittle and yellowed, but then he found one bound in cracked leather, its cover embossed with a strange sigil, a circle surrounded by jagged lines. He flipped it open, and his stomach turned. The book wasn't written in English. The script was jagged, curling symbols that seemed to writhe on the page. But scattered throughout were sketches of the hotel, of the basement doors, of the cloaked figure. And then he found an entry in English, scrawled in a shaky hand. The hotel was not built. It grew. Its foundations stretched deeper than stone, older than the town. It feeds on those who enter, consuming their bodies, their names, their souls. To escape, one must sever its root, but the root is guarded. The master will not allow it. Claire leaned over his shoulder, reading aloud. Sever its root, what does that mean? Where is the root? Ethan turned the page and froze. There was a map, crude, hand-drawn, but unmistakable. It showed the hotel as it stood, with a tunnel beneath the basement leading deeper underground. At the center of the map was a symbol that looked like a massive, twisted tree. Before they could study it further, the chandelier above them groaned. They looked up in horror as its chains snapped, sending the massive structure plummeting toward them. They dove out of the way as it crashed into the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. The door rattled violently, the chair splintering as unseen hands clawed at the wood. "We have to go now." Ethan stuffed the book under his arm, dragging Claire toward a side door he'd noticed. They burst into another hallway, this one narrower, lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women. Their painted eyes seemed to follow Ethan and Claire as they ran, their expressions twisting into cruel smiles. The hallway tilted suddenly, the floor sloping as if the entire hotel were shifting. Claire slipped, catching herself on one of the portraits. To her horror, the painted hand she touched was warm, its fingers curling around her wrist. She screamed, yanking free as the portrait subject pressed against the canvas, trying to claw its way out. They sprinted faster, turning corner after corner until they reached another stairwell. This one spiraled downward, colder with every step. The walls here were damp, covered in black mold that pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. At the bottom, they found a heavy iron door. Ethan pushed it open, and the smell hit them instantly, a mixture of rot and earth. The tunnel beyond stretched into darkness, just like the map had shown. Claire clutched his arm. "This is it. This is where the root is." They followed the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in, slick with moisture. Whispering voices grew louder, bouncing off the stone, some calling their names, others begging for release. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a cavern so massive it stole their breath. At its center was the root, a grotesque, pulsating mass of black tendrils twisting upward, embedding themselves into the ceiling. It looked alive, throbbing like a giant heart. And at its base, kneeling in reverence, were dozens of figures. Some were half decayed, others freshly taken, their eyes glowing faintly as they whispered in unison. "Feed the master. Feed the master," Claire gagged, clutching her stomach. This is what it feeds on." Ethan pulled the cracked leather book from under his arm and flipped to the map again. "It says we have to sever it, but how? With what?" As if in answer, a low growl rumbled through the cavern. The figures at the base of the root lifted their heads in unison, their mouths opening wider than humanly possible. The shadows thickened, coalescing into the shape of the cloaked entity. Its presence filled the cavern, colder and heavier than ever before. It raised one hand, and a jagged blade of shadow formed in its grip. Slowly, it extended the weapon toward Ethan. Claire grabbed his arm, panicked. "It's giving it to you." Ethan stared at the blade, his chest heaving. "No, it's daring me. It wants me to try." The entity tilted its head, the brim of its hat shadowing its flickering face. Its voice thundered across the cavern. "Strike if you can, but know this, those who sever the root are never free, they only take my place." The blade hovered inches from Ethan's hand, waiting. Claire shook her head violently. "Don't do it. If you touch that thing, you'll become part of this. We'll never get out." But the whispers of the kneeling figures grew louder, deafening now, chanting in unison, "Take it! Take it! Take it!" Ethan's hand trembled as he reached out. For a moment, his reflection flickered in the blade, his face pale, hollow-eyed, almost unrecognizable. He turned to Claire, his voice breaking. "If this is the only way, I have to." And as his fingers closed around the weapon, the cavern itself seemed to scream. The blade burned cold in Ethan's hand, as if it were forged from frozen shadows. His knuckles whitened around the hilt, and the moment he gripped it fully, the chanting stopped. Silence fell over the cavern, broken only by the wet, pulsing throb of the monstrous root. The cloaked entity watched from the darkness, its faceless head tilting ever so slightly, like a parent admiring a child's first step. Claire staggered back, her eyes wide. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. Put it down, please." But Ethan's gaze was locked on the root. The grotesque tangle of tendrils writhed as though aware of his intent. He could feel it inside his head, whispering promises of freedom. "Strike me and you will leave. Strike me and you will be free." He lifted the blade, his arms shaking under the weight of something far greater than steel. With a primal scream, he swung it down. The blade sank into the root, cutting through its pulsing flesh with a sickening sound. A spray of thick, black ichor burst out, burning Ethan's skin where it touched. The cavern erupted in a deafening roar, the kneeling figures writhing as though in agony. The ground shook violently, cracks splitting the floor. Tendrils lashed out wildly, knocking Claire to the ground. She scrambled toward Ethan, shouting, "Stop. You're killing it, but you're killing yourself too." Ethan gritted his teeth and pulled the blade free, then struck again, and again, each blow sending shockwaves through the cavern. With every strike, the shadows crawled higher up his arms, burrowing into his veins. His eyes clouded black, his face contorting in pain, but still he swung. Finally, with one last desperate cry, Ethan drove the blade deep into the root's core. The cavern fell silent for half a heartbeat, then exploded with light. A blast of white energy surged outward, hurling Ethan and Claire across the cavern. The kneeling figures disintegrated into ash, their whispers cut short. The root convulsed, tearing itself apart, its tendrils thrashing wildly before collapsing into a heap of rotting flesh. The cloaked entity staggered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Claire crawled to Ethan, grabbing his shoulders. "We did it, we!" Her words died in her throat. Ethan's eyes were solid black now, and shadows poured from his mouth and nose like smoke. His body shook violently as the blade dissolved in his hands, merging into him. The cloaked entity straightened, though its form was barely holding together. Its voice boomed across the cavern. "The master falls, the master rises." Claire's blood ran cold. She shook Ethan, screaming, "No, you're not him. Fight it, Ethan. Please fight it." For a brief moment, Ethan's eyes flickered, the blackness receding to reveal the man she knew. His lips trembled, and he whispered, "Run." Then the shadows consumed him completely. His body lifted from the ground, the brim of a hat forming over his head, his face dissolving into the same shifting void as the entity before him. The cavern bowed to his presence, the hotel itself rumbling as though welcoming its new master. Claire fell to her knees, sobbing, "No, no, you can't leave me like this." The cavern walls cracked open, revealing a stairway leading upward. Light poured through it, the first real light she'd seen since entering the hotel. She looked back at Ethan, but the man she loved was gone. In his place stood the new master, towering and cold, watching her with unreadable eyes. He raised his hand, and for a moment she thought he would strike her down. Instead, the shadows parted, creating a clear path to the stairway. "Go!" his voice boomed, layered with both Ethan's tone and the echoes of countless others. "You do not belong here." Claire hesitated, torn between the chance to escape and the horror of leaving him behind. But as the cavern began to collapse, rocks tumbling from above, she forced herself to run. She sprinted up the stairs, her lungs burning, tears streaming down her face. When she burst through the final door, she found herself standing outside. The storm was gone. The hotel loomed behind her, silent and dark, its windows lifeless. For the first time, it looked truly abandoned. She stumbled into the empty parking lot, gasping for breath. Her car was still there, waiting. With trembling hands, she climbed inside, started the engine, and drove. This time, the road stretched forward without looping back. The hotel shrank in her rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. But as she drove, the whispers followed. Faint at first, then louder, until she realized they weren't coming from outside. They were inside her head. And though Ethan was gone, his voice was among them, whispering her name. Months later, Claire sat in her apartment, staring at the leather-bound book she had taken from the library. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it, though every instinct told her she should. Its pages shifted when she looked too long, the symbols rearranging themselves, the sketches moving. One night, unable to resist, she opened it again. A new entry had appeared in shaky handwriting. She escaped, for now. But the hotel is eternal. It will call her back, and when she returns, I will be waiting. Her blood turned to ice as she read the signature at the bottom. Ethan. She slammed the book shut, but it was too late. A knock sounded at her apartment door, 3 sharp raps, deliberate and slow. Her phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a single word on the cracked screen. "Check-in." Claire backed away, her breath caught in her throat. She knew the truth then. You could leave the hotel, but it never left you. And sooner or later, it always collected its guests. The knock came again, louder this time. She screamed.